Hi, it's Gordon again. As I finished the last video on prioritizing projects, I realized that there are a number of issues that are probably crossing your mind as you watch that video, and I thought I would address those in this short addendum. So what's probably crossing your mind is that is the answer to the question of what happens when the constraint moves from being internal to external. So if you think about internal being all those different sections in the pipeline and external being the flow of water or into the pipe or indeed out of the pipe, you can well imagine that as you follow the 5 focusing steps that eventually you'll get a pipe that's so large that you may actually find that you don't have sufficient water coming in or places where you can place that water once it's been through the pipe. And that's a situation where it's an external constraint. In those situations, then the 5 focusing steps continues to apply. For example, it might be about finding other sources of water or other sources of liquid, or what else you could use the pipe for when it's not being used to transport water. Alternatively, in terms of where the water is flowing after it's left the pipe, finding other reserves. And so the same concept would apply. What you'll find under those circumstances and what happens in reality is that the constraint will continue to oscillate between being internal and external, and then moving to external, and then it'll move back to internal. So if you think about it being in a normal business, you remove all the internal constraints, you get to a point where you can meet all the demand of the market, so you go out and chase the market to try and find new market segments. You discover those, they place increasing demand on your existing capacity. The constraint begins to present itself internally, so you go through the same 5 focusing steps to remove it from the internal until it eventually moves to the external. The second question I thought you might be asking yourselves as you went through that video was, is there an alternative to the 5 focusing steps? And what I mean by that is you can well imagine that going through the 5 focusing steps a multiple number of times can be quite exhausting and probably very disrupting to an organisation. And so the question arises as to whether it's possible for an organisation to define where it wants that constraint to exist. And the first question that organisation would need to ask itself in those situations is, should that constraint be internal or external to the organisation? There are many factors that you would take into account when making that judgment, and in most organisations, in fact, the constraint is the market, where they would want to have an unlimited opportunity to grow their business by identifying more and more market segments for their business. So there are examples like the mining industry where they have markets of last resort, and so therefore tend to strategically consider their constraints to be internal if in fact they understand the systems thinking view. There's a lot more to that issue of strategically locating your constraint, and indeed the activities that you need to perform to ensure that it remains in that location, but that's outside the scope of this particular presentation. The third question I thought you might ask is there a distinction between projects and operational continuous improvement initiatives? And I've read a number of books that suggest that you should separate the operational responsibilities of continuous improvement from the project-related activities. And I have a concern about that, because if you think about the steps 2 and 3 of the 5 focusing steps, they are very much continuous improvement, and indeed could well be given to the responsible people within the operation to perform. But what's important is that there is a coordination effort between those continuous improvement initiatives and the project initiatives, so that one doesn't step over the other, that we ensure that the continuous improvement precedes the projects, and the projects pick up on step 4 where the continuous improvement can't continue. It's also important that that when embarking on a continuous improvement approach, that it is coordinated and focused using the 5 focusing steps, because you could well be at risk of inadvertently moving the constraint unconsciously by multiple and simultaneous continuous improvement initiatives that are going on around the business that that aren't coordinated, and as a result can cause more harm than help. The final question that came to my mind was the one of how do you reconcile the traditional financial internal rate of return and net present value calculations with the 5 focusing steps? Because for those of you with a financial bent, you'd be well aware that IRR and NPV calculations do not take into account the constraint. Those calculations are somewhat naive in that respect, and so it's quite possible that you'll get a project that has a very compelling NPV or IRR outcomes, but they do so without recognizing that the capacity of the existing system is incapable of meeting those levels of performance, or indeed if the financial calculations are about cost savings, that those cost savings actually impact adversely on the constraint or any non-constraints in terms of their ability to subordinate to the constraint. So, you know, if someone puts up a business case that seeks to reduce the amount of maintenance crews that they might have in their organisation, and as a result of that, those maintenance crews aren't available to support the downtime on the constraint, a constraint downtime could amount to only an hour or two, but in terms of financial performance amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost revenue resulting from the fact that that constraint was down for that period, due to the fact that someone thought that they could save a few dollars by reducing the maintenance crews down to a point where they had not considered the implication on the system as a whole. So hopefully the answers to those questions will help you. If you have any other questions, please leave those at the bottom of the video in the comments section. Thank you.